Part 14, Chapter 43, Trapped at the South Pole. The Mount Everest guides team steadily arrived at the South Pole. The fastest was in 3 hours, the slowest took over 6 from C3. However, they all made it. Speed was not on Dawa and John Paul's mind, it was the winds. They left Camp 3 in calm conditions, but by afternoon the winds were gusting to over 50 miles per hour, trapping everyone in their tents. It seemed the outer bands of Cyclone Amphan, the first super cyclone to form in the Bay of Bengal since 1999, made landfall this morning with 115 mile per hour winds. "Here we go again," Aaron said to Bart in their tent. "Yeah, not sure what this does to our summit push," Bart replied. The two men lay on their backs, watching the tent walls bellow like a raging bull's nostrils flaring. They had their oxygen masks on, flowing at a liter per minute. The climbing Sherpas had melted snow, so their water bottles were full. They needed to stay hydrated. Over 50 people had gone up to the summit, tried to get to the summit the previous night. Most were back down before the winds hit, but a few were still on the mountain. Everyone on the team was doing well, but the winds were a significant concern, and it was out of their control. All they could do was wait. There was not enough days left in the season to return to C2 and wait out the storm. Plus, John Paul had severe doubts that anyone had the strength to make backup the Lhotse face for a third time. John Paul discussed the team with Dawa, the team Sidar, the lead Sherpa. Speaking softly to avoid being heard, their strongest climbers are Harper, Tony, Dutch, Aaron, and Bart. Claudia is also strong, but she's preoccupied with Pablo's struggle. Michael's in good shape, but his tent mate Jim, he's been very slow, even on the high rate of 4 liters per minute of oxygen. John Paul checked his sat phone for the third time in half an hour, looking for an updated weather forecast. He knew it would be windy from C2 to 3, and it was right. On schedule, the winds calmed for the trip from C3 to the Col, but this wind event was unexpected. It appeared that the cyclone had made a slight westward turn when it hit India and Bangladesh. Everest had escaped a direct hit along with the heavy snow, but the winds were dangerously high and a light snowfall. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they left for the summit at 10. Well, that's what the usual plan was. John Paul, he wanted Jim and Pablo to leave at 8 so they could go at a slower pace. "Options?" John Paul said to Dawa. The experienced Sherpa replied, "We've seen this before. There are only 2 real options. Hope the winds calm down with the sunset, and then we go up tonight, or prepare to spend the night and go up tomorrow night. I've seen these cyclone winds before, like last year with Fani, and in 2010 with Layla. They lasted for 24 hours, and then they vanished, leaving pristine conditions. I bet we see the same thing this time." "I agree, Dawa," John Paul said, watching the tent walls heave in and out like a bellowing dragon. "There's another option. We could abandon the summit push altogether and just go down. But I don't want to do that because I think that we have a strong enough team that everybody can make it to the top. But I worry about our slow ones. And if these winds pick back up as we crest the South Summit, they'll get cold and potentially frostbite. We need to keep everyone moving as fast as possible. I can't believe how cold it is. We might see wind chills well below 40 degrees Fahrenheit." The 2 experienced professionals sat quietly, considering their next move. John Paul left her tent and went over to one of his competitors. They competed back home, but they were companions in the mountains. "What's your plan?" he asked the leader. "Probably the same as your right. It'd be suicide to go up tonight." A couple other leaders came over and joined the discussion. They talked about team size, pace, departure times. Soon they had a plan, but not every team wanted to talk openly, preferring to keep their tactics private. It would take most climbers about 11 hours for the round trip, and then another 2 or 3 to get back down to Camp 2, where they would rest for the night. A few would do it in 9 or less, others in 14 or more. The key was to summit at dawn around 5 a.m. and not in the dark. So most teams plan to leave the Col between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock at night. John Paul thought about Jim and Pablo. He assumed it would take them 14 to 16 hours, so he changed their departure time from 8 to 6, not wanting them to get caught up in the dawn summit rush. He'd wait until tomorrow to tell them. "We aren't going up tonight," Harper told her husband Mark over the sat phone. "Are you safe?" "Yes, I'm in the tent with Mingma. He's always by my side. He's my guardian angel in the mountains like you are at home. Mingma smiled as he had no choice but to hear her conversation with her husband. John Paul and Dawa had made their decision. They went to the tent to share the news. Unzipping Claudia and Pablo's tent door just enough so they could make eye contact, Dawa began. There are many climbers still in the mountains. Some have frostbite. So some of our climbing Sherpas are going to go up now to help them get down. John Paul took over. So we will not be going up tonight. I got an updated forecast and it calls for high winds tonight, but lessening midday tomorrow. Oh, Pablo felt his stomach flip as he sucked harder on the oxygen. Do we have enough oxygen to do this and still have him go at 4 liters per minute? Claudia asked, edging closer to the door so she could hear over the sound of the flapping tent door into high winds. More than enough. The climbing Sherpas brought all we have from base camp here last week, so we're good. We can stay here all week if you want, John Paul joked. I think 2 nights will be enough, Dawa chimed in with a low chuckle. He'd been working on understanding how foreigners joke, and he was getting pretty good at it. Everyone took the news well, understanding there was little choice, but also realizing that John Paul could have pulled the plug on the entire expedition. Now they had one job: take care of their bodies. They needed to drink as much water as was available, eat as much as they could, and rest. It sounded easy, but as Dr. Edward Vis Dunart described in The Death Zone, you just don't want to do anything. Isn't this dangerous? Jim asked Michael. I mean, our bodies are dying even lying here in the tent. I don't want to eat any more. I don't want to eat any more of that mush. And I've run out of gel packs. Michael opened his eyes and looked at his friend. I have plenty. You can have some of mine, Jim. He smiled slightly. Thanks. This is turning out to be some trip. Dutch and Tony were both fast asleep in their tent. They didn't seem to be bothered by the wind noise. When John Paul and Dawa told them of the delay, they both just nodded and fell back on top of their down sleeping bags, still wearing their goose down suits. So we'll spend tonight here on the Col, get through the day tomorrow, and leave for the summit, hopefully around 10 tomorrow night. Harper continued the update to her husband. Are there other teams up there? Mark asked. Yes, and that's a big concern. There are about 100 people on the Col, about 10 teams. It could be a log jam at the choke points. Mingma and I are going to talk about this. But for now, Mingma was fast asleep. Harper noticed that he slept on a bumpy flight from Tulukla, and now this. Nothing seemed to shake him. Harper looked at her new angel and smiled as she spoke gently to her husband. Honey, I love you so much and I miss you. I can't wait to see you and the kids again. I'm going to go and turn off the phone to save my batteries. I'll send you a text with any updates before I try to sleep tonight. Harper pressed the red hang up button and then powered the phone down. She looked at the phone as a tiny chime went off and the display went dark. A gap in the clouds revealed a stunning sunset from the South Col. With a lull in the wind, Harper left the tent to stretch her legs. She walked around the Col, a bit dismayed by so many tents. Walking over to the northeast side of the Col, she stopped, looking at the area where the climbers had perished in the 1996 tragedy. She let it sink in how close they were to safety, yet with the storm raging and zero visibility, they couldn't be seen and they couldn't be heard. She reached up to her neck and unzipped her down suit enough to touch the red sunji around her neck that had been blessed by a lama at the puja ceremony. She closed her eyes and turned around. The wind gusted strongly as the snow began falling. Chapter 44, the summit push begins. The winds roared throughout the night at the South Col. Even earplugs didn't help. Hell, these winds are worse than your snoring, Jim shouted to Michael at 3 a.m. It's going to be a long day at the Col for the 100 people virtually trapped there. Even in perfect weather, there's not much to do other than take in the spectacular views. Choi Oyu and Pumori to the west, the northern flanks of Lhotse to the south, and of course the triangular face, balcony, and the south summit of Everest to the north. They couldn't see the true summit from the Col. The climbing Sherpas of Mount Everest guides had done heroic work for other teams yesterday when the sudden wind event hit a few climbers still in the mountain hard. Several had frostbite and had run out of oxygen. They were with low-cost guides who lacked the extra resources to help their clients, so Dawa led the rescue. As the sun rose, the winds eased a bit. The forecast called for calm conditions by midday. Harper got out of her tent along with Mi'kmaq and walked around the col. Looks like there was some damage last night, Harper said. Always up here, Mi'kmaq replied. The wind is why there's so little snow on the col, only rocks. He was right. There's virtually no snow on the South Col, in spite of being at 25,938 feet, just under the magic 8,000 meter point. The only higher camp in the world was Camp 3 on the Tibet side of Everest at 27,309 feet. Mi'kmaq, what's our strategy for managing the crowds tonight? She asked her personal Sherpa. They returned to the tent to begin melt snow for hot drinks for breakfast. It would take over an hour just to melt the snow. Didi, we need to go fast. Move as fast as we can. Try to get ahead of everyone else and not stuck behind the slow ones. Mi'kmaq knew what he was doing after 17 summits of Everest over the years. His strategy was simple. Get out ahead and move fast. Take short, efficient breaks, and if someone slow is blocking the route, unclip and move past them as quickly as possible. Isn't it risky to unclip? Harper asked him. Yeah, we'll only do it in the safe sections where when we leave camp tonight, there'll be many other people leaving at the same time. Usually there's a queue. This is what we do to get ahead of the other people, maybe even first. He had done this before. Why not leave earlier and just avoid the crowds? She posed a question to her Sherpa. You are fast, Didi. If we leave too early, then we'll summit in the dark before the sun comes up. It'll be cold, no views. Mi'kmaq flashed his big smile as he shared his experience with his charge. While walking around the South Col, Harper heard her name called out. It was a friend she had climbed Denali with several years earlier. The two women hugged one another tightly for several minutes. I didn't know you were going to be here, Harper said. Yeah, I've been planning it for several years. After I did well on Denali, I knew if I ever got a chance to Everest, I had to take it. All the stars aligned at work and at home, and well, here I am. How are you? The two women chatted for over an hour. Mi'kmaq brought Harper a cup of steaming hot Sherpa tea. Touche, Mi'kmaq. This is a good friend. Harper introduced Mi'kmaq to her friend, both politely greeting each other, but namaste. He walked away as he asked her, how's your mom? The winds continued to ease throughout the day to the pleasure of the team. John Paul called everyone together as they ate lunch standing up. It was Spam on bread. Jim liked it. Okay, tonight's the night. Dawa and I created a plan, and I spoke with many of the other leaders here at the Col. Pablo and Jim, your personal Sherpas, you're going to leave at 6 o'clock. The rest of us at 9:30. I plan on us summing around dawn, 5 a.m. The winds will still be stiff, but they'll be manageable at about 20 miles per hour. As you can tell, it's a bit warmer now. The forecast calls for the temps to be around 0 degrees Fahrenheit. So it'll still be cold with the wind chill well below 0. So as usual, let's layer up and have spares in our packs like we discussed many times. Everyone's going to start on O's at 2 liters per minute except for Jim and Pablo. You'll continue running at 4. If you feel you need more, just ask your personal Sherpa to turn it up. I have no problem with everyone running at 4 liters per minute if we need it. We have enough. John Paul paused for questions and then it continued. It looks like there'll be 100 people going up tonight. Everest is a big mountain, and if we all spread out, it won't be a problem. But there will be a few trouble spots. I expect lines in the ridge, at the Hillary step, and perhaps to the summit. So we need to be patient. Tony and Dutch, I expect that you'll move fast. Harper then spoke up. Mi'kmaq and I talked about getting ahead of the crowd and passing people in the triangular face. Mi'kmaq nodded, but he didn't speak. I know. Dawa and Mi'kmaq, I agree with that strategy. And if Dutch and Tony can join you, that would be great. Once again, it appeared the team would be in several groups. The 3 strongest climbers out front, Jim and Claudia and Pablo. By leaving 2 hours earlier, would be in the mix while Michael and Aaron and Bart would move at their own pace. John Paul would move around keeping tabs on everyone and monitoring the radio. 4 of the climbing Sherpas would stay at the Col to give aid if needed. John Paul might position 1 or 2 at the balcony if he felt conditions were deteriorating. He knew he had a solid plan. He had done this many times. Okay, relax this afternoon, sleep if you can, but hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. It'll be crazy when we leave. We need you to start getting ready at 8:30. It'll take longer than you think to get your boots on, layers, oxygen in your pack. Your personal Sherpa will help you. Don't be shy. John Paul told the group just as everyone was moving. Pablo spoke up. Hey, I just want to thank everyone for your support so far. I know I'm not the fastest and I hope to summit, but whatever happens, thank you. His voice trailed off as Jim spoke up with a grin. Hell, you're faster than me. Everyone laughed. Tony was already back in his tent, leaving the group. That afternoon passed by painfully slow. They would catch a few minutes of sleep before violently waking up from Cheyne-Stokes breathing. This was not unusual at altitude and with people with sleep apnea. It was characterized by progressively deeper and sometimes faster breathing, followed by a gradual decrease that results in temporarily stopping in breathing. The body was no longer gets oxygen and wakes up gasping for air. Aaron and Bart shared 3 bags of freeze-dried food for dinner. Ready to get this done? Bart asked his best friend. The two went way back, meeting at a climbing gym in their hometown. Years later, they bought the gym, and now they're partners in the business. They've been on 4 expeditions together, and Everest was their dream. Dutch was feeling anxious. He reached out to Tony, hoping to build some kind of bond before heading out in a few hours. So what are our chances? He began the conversation. I think good, Tony responded, but not really engaging. How do you feel? Nervous? Tony, now in a sleeping bag, rolled over on his left side. Not really. I've done enough of these that I know the drill. The first 30 minutes will be hard. It always takes a little while to get my blood flowing. So I'll be cold, probably having trouble getting my breath. It'll be uncomfortable. I was looking at the triangular face today. It starts easy, but it picks up pretty fast. There'll be a good boot pass, so we'll have decent steps. I am worried about so many people, so I think it's a good idea to pass as many as we can early on. Dutch was shocked and pleased. Tony had said more words than he had in the previous 5 weeks combined. Dutch, appreciating the conversation, continued. I hope the slow guys do okay and don't get in trouble. Tony, now rolling over, nodded. Well, if they do, they have others to help them. And with that, he closed his eyes. The sunset was inspiring. Harper stood outside her tent, taking in the last rays of light. She felt immense gratitude for being here. Kneeling, she looked at Lieutenant Mima. Thank you, Mima. Thank you. He smiled, looking at her deeply. You're welcome. She walked over to the edge of camp and pressed number 1 on her sat phone. We're leaving in a few hours. As 8:30 came, the now familiar ritual of getting dressed for climbing began. They slept in their base layers or even their down suit, using a sleeping bag more as a duvet than a bag. Tony started rummaging around in his pack. What you doing? Dutch asked. Summit socks. I always bring a fresh pair of socks that I only use in the summit push. Ah, here they are. He pulled out a fresh pair of darn tough socks, still clipped together from the store. As he put both socks on his bare feet, he let out a satisfying moan. Yeah, this is what I was looking for. Another rare moment of emotion from the stoic individual. Dutch laughed. Should I leave you 3 alone? They both laughed. Harper turned on her footbed warmers. I hope the battery lasts, Harper thought. She turned the level to the lowest, knowing it would take a while for them to work. If her feet got cold, she would turn up the level with her wireless remote. Scooting to the edge of the tent, Michael pulled in his and Jim's large and red and yellow boots, respectively the 8,000-meter Malay and La Sportiva mountaineering boots. Each man took over 15 minutes to pull on the boots. They had kept their liners in their sleeping bag to keep them warm. Liner on first, tie the laces, outer on next, pull the laces tight, double knot them. Liner gloves were the first layer of protection for their hands, insulated gloves were next, and heavy mittens were in their packs for backup. Thankfully, the still air temperature was not too bad, but when the wind would pick up, all these layers would come into play. Aaron and Bart crawled out of their tent. Reaching back into the vestibule, they grabbed their crampons. Kneeling down on one knee, Bart started to put his crampons on. Pimba leaned over. Help? He offered. Ever since Bart had the upper respiratory problem, Pimba had kept an eye on him, watching him carefully if his problems would return. You okay? Pimba asked. Bart looked up, fastening the Stacy strap around his ankle. Yeah, Pimba. Thank you so much for everything. Pimba blinked. You're welcome. 7 of the team had left 2 hours earlier. Jim and his 2 climbing Sherpas, plus Claudia and Pablo with their support. That left 6 members plus their personal Sherpas and John Paul. The group of 13 mulled around their tents in the dark of the South Col. Harper and Mingma left camp first, followed by Tony with Lapka, Dutch with Purba. They were moving swiftly, with confidence, but they were moving too fast. I need to slow down, Dutch called out to Purba. He slowed a half step. Tony had been right. The first 30 minutes was really tough. Now the entire pod had slowed down a bit. The members were fighting to get into a rhythm. The climbing Sherpas feel into familiarity of this. Combined, the Sherpas had over 50 summits of 8,000-meter peaks. They were extremely experienced and took their responsibilities seriously. The pod caught up with a long line of climbers. For an hour, Mingma had monitored speed at the seemingly endless lines of bright headlamps crawling up the triangular face towards the balcony. He was calculating their speed, his speed, how the members were doing, all to know when to do the push. Now stopped behind a line of stalled climber, he knew the time was right. He unclipped from the fixed rope, took 2 steps to his right, and turned around and looked at Harper. Let's go. Chapter 45, climbing to the summit. Pasang and Jim were halfway up the triangular face. Pratimba was climbing with them, carrying the extra oxygen for Jim. They were making good time, but not great. They had been moving for about 4 hours and just made the turn around a massive boulder towards the balcony. Claudia and Pablo were with their personal Sherpas and were a bit behind. It was 10:30 p.m. on summit night. The conditions are about to get as good as it gets on Everest. Clear skies, temperatures around zero, and for now, a light wind from the west. The south summit blocked most of the breeze. The 100 climbers had spread out on the triangular face, and some were already above the balcony. How are we doing? Harper asked Mingma. Good, Didi, good. Tony with Lapka and Dutch with Purba were right behind them. They left the South Col right on time around 9:30. After passing about 50 people in the triangular face, they arrived in the balcony in 3.5 hours. They were right on schedule to arrive around dawn, in about 4 hours. Mingma heard the radio crack. Mingma, where are you? It was Dawa monitoring the team from the South Col with the 3 other climbing Sherpas. On the ridge above the balcony, Mingma told the Siddar. At the balcony, the sub-team of 6 stopped to swap oxygen bottles. Even though they were only half empty, they would use a full bottle to get to the summit and back to the balcony, where they would swap out the almost empty cylinder for the half-full one. Sherpas managed the bottle swap. It was delicate work to unscrew the cylinder from the regulator to swap the bottles. If the screwed threads became damaged, it would make the regulator or the bottle useless. They carried extra regulators just in case this happened. However, the Sherpas were very skilled in this maneuver, even in gloved hands, cold temperatures, and high winds. While the Sherpas worked, the members sat on the snow, drinking half a liter of water. They put electrolyte replacement pills in their water bottles. Tony liked ones from Camelback, Harper from Nunn, and Dutch liked the electrolyte tablets from Fizz. They all worked similarly, but some tasted better than others. They took in about 200 to 400 calories. Of course, Harper ate her honey stinger bars, while Dutch preferred goo gels. Leaving the balcony, he began climbing the southeast ridge proper. Dutch was nervous. John Paul had talked a lot about this section being steep and rocky in places. Thankfully, they had the ridge mostly to themselves. There were a handful of climbers above them, headlamps looking like midgies, tiny fireflies in the distance. Look out for rockfall, Tony leaned over to tell Dutch. Dutch had gone into a deep thought as he took each step. He remembered the mantra from his climbing coach back home. Short, simple steps. Short, simple steps. The secret to climbing Everest was not to hurry, but to be patient. Even if it feels terribly slow, as long as you're moving, you're going higher. But if you go too slow and you don't turn back, you might die. It's a delicate balance learned through experience. Slow, simple steps. Slow, simple steps. Control my breathing. Control my emotions. I know I can do this. I am doing this. Dutch paused for a moment to look back down at the South Col. He could see the lights from the tents. It looked like a small city. Above the South Col, he saw a line of headlamps on Lhotse. He tapped Tony on the shoulder and pointed. Tony looked away, knowing that he would not get Lhotse after Everest that he had planned. The climbers moved deliberately, Mingma in the lead. Harper was 2 steps behind him. They placed each step carefully and purposefully in the footprint of the one above. It was efficient, preserving energy for the final push and the return. John Paul had talked to the team about the descent almost as much as going up. On Everest, more people perished on the descent than going up. He told them, according to the Himalayan database, only 8 of the 85 member deaths from 2000 to now, 55 were on the descent compared to only 8 while ascending. 55 to 8. And then they were only halfway up. Climbers often push themselves so hard they run out of energy once they top out. Standing on the summit's emotional. Some people find themselves drained. They become careless or lose the motivation to continue, all their adrenaline used up. Also, some use too much oxygen on the way up, failing to monitor the usage accurately. Sadly, their climbing teammates fail to look after each other. Most deaths in the mountain are a result of human error. Jim, Pasang, and Perturba stopped and stood side by side at the balcony, a room-sized flat area. Teams in the 1990s, mostly Japanese, sometimes use it as a camp. At 27,500 feet, it's almost 400 meters into the death zone, too high for most to consider camping there today. Pasang and Perturba worked quickly to swap the bottle. And soon the 3 were moving higher, but they were going very slow now. Before leaving the balcony, Jim looked down at the moonlit gully. He searched for Claudia and Pablo. He could see their headlamps with no movement. This last section before the balcony became steep. Huge boulders dotted the landscape. Pablo was in trouble. Similar to pulling into Camp 3, he was leaning over, hands on his knees, not enough energy to even lift his head. He began to hyperventilate. Pasang knelt under his face mask. Sorry, slow, breathe, no gasp. Help me, I can't breathe. Pasang turned his regulator to the maximum flow of 6 liters per minute. Claudia stood by watching, moving closer to put her hand on his back. He stood up, feeling relief from the higher flow. Oh, my darling, I'm too tired. I'm done. I'm tired, he said, barely audible through his mask and the sound of her own breathing. The 4 climbers were at the end of the line of climbers that day. No one was behind them. Pasang took a step back. Harper looked up at the headlamps of the balcony. It was not that far. But Harper, Tony, and Dutch, well, they were over 3 hours ahead of them. If he went down now, should she go with him? Should she continue with Narwhal? Was it too late for her to keep going? John Paul, come in. Claudia spoke into the radio microphone clipped to this pack strap. John Paul, we need help. He didn't answer. He was in the middle of Southeast Ridge, where it's a radio dead spot. He must be in the wrong place at the wrong time for her. Yes, this is Dawa, over. Dawa started back up from the South Col. Dawa, thank God. Pablo's on his knees. He can't breathe. Pasang turned his O's up to 6 and it helped, but I think he's done. Pasang keyed his mic, speaking in Sherpa. Dawa, he's in bad shape. Send up 2 men with more O's. We need to get him down now. Pablo, now on all 4s, had calmed his breathing, but it was clear that his climb was over. He began coughing, gagging, but nothing came up. Now the priority was to get him back to base camp in Kathmandu as soon as humanly possible. But the first stop was the South Col. He looked up at his future wife and Pasang. Yes, I need to go down now. Harper and Mingma were almost to the south summit. The slope had been moderate most of the ridge, but now flattened out. Good, Harper thought. But then it kicked up aggressively. Even the south summit on Everest makes you work for it. Harper followed Mingma up to the steps of the false summit. Jim was hurting. His pace was slow, but it was steady. Both Pasang and Perturba had seen this before. A person who didn't fit the usual profile of an Everest climber, but their deep desire and confidence pushed them to places within that they never knew existed. Jim was showing his grit, his determination. At a break, the 2 climbing Sherpas spoke. He's slow and old, Perturba said. We still have plenty of time to get to the summit and back, Pasang countered. Perturba, demurring to his senior, simply nodded. Yes, Let's get him there. Michael and Aaron and Bart were just below Harper, Tony, and Dutch. They moved well, but not as fast as Harper. Harper and Mingma crested the south summit, greeted by a strong wind, maybe 25 miles an hour. Windy, Mingma says simply into his radio. Just then, a big gust moved two climbers a few inches off their markers. Pablo took a 15-minute break, finished up his water and energy bars. He stood up and looked at Claudia, then moved next to her face. We talked about this. You go. And with that, he turned with Pasang, clipped into the ropes, and another rope connected their harness, and took a step toward the south col. He took another, and then he stopped. He looked at the lights in the col. He turned around on Denali, but pushed through the wall to summit Aconcagua. Was he making the same mistake? Could he do it? He stood still, quiet. Pasang was a few feet behind him. Pablo turned around and looked back up. Claudia was standing in the same spot when he left her a few moments earlier, not moving. Her eyes were locked on him. Pasang, Galen, and Tenzing have left to meet you. They have 2 bottles each, so turn him up to the max flow. Dawa was now in command, controlling the situation from the south col. Help coming, Pasang told Pablo. Even though it was in Sherpa, Pablo knew what the right thing to do upon hearing this on the radio. He lifted his down-covered arm and his mittened right hand. He opened his palm to Claudia, struggling to raise a thumb out of the palm. Claudia nodded, turned, and took another step higher. 1 hour, Didi. 1 hour to the summit. And with that, Mingma led her down the south col towards the Cornice Traverse, the Hillary Step, and the summit. At the base of the Hillary Step, Mingma, she gasped. My oxygen. Something's wrong, Harper pleaded.